Hi, good morning, everyone. You're very welcome to our MBA Experience Day. I'm just going to wait a couple of moments and give everybody a chance to actually join the webinar this morning, and then we'll kick off. Super. Good morning, everyone. Gives me great pleasure to welcome you this morning to UCD Smurfit School to our MBA Experience event. My name is Edel O'Leary, and I lead the MBA Program team at Smurfit School, and I will be your MC for this morning's session. We have a great lineup of speakers and guest panelists for you this morning. But just to start, I'm going to ask my Smurfit School colleagues to turn on their cameras very briefly and just give a quick wave so that I can introduce everybody. So there we have Catherine Del Zesto, who's our full-time MBA program manager, works with me here in the program office. Morning, Catherine. We have Jim Parr, economist, who will give us a taste lecture this morning. I can see Jessica from our MBA admissions team. Good morning, Jess. And finally, Mark from our MBA careers team. You'll hear from everyone later this morning. So thank you very much, guys. So Saturday mornings, very precious times for all of us. And we're really pleased to see so many of you here in this virtual format. So thank you very much for joining us. So in brief, what we'll cover this morning, and we promise to finish at midday, if not a touch before. I'm going to start with a very brief overview of the Smurfit MBA programs, and then I'm going to be followed by Jim, who's going to give you a taste lecture, the vital significance of economics. Then Mark is going to lead an MBA careers panel discussion with Ruth Hughes from the Kellogg Company, with Gaurav Bansal from Accenture, and with Peter Condon from Qualtrics. Then Jess is going to speak to us about the MBA admissions process and scholarships that are available to UCD Smurfit School. And then finally, we're going to have a live Q&A session with all of us, and we'll be joined at that point by Stacey Jemison. And Stacey is a senior medical advisor at Merck Sharp and Dome and is a current year one modular MBA student. We've asked Stacey to join us today as she's our current Journal.ie scholarship recipient, and she'll be happy to take any questions that you might have. Now, I should also say that in each of the sessions this morning, as we go through, we'll also have built-in time to actually take questions. And we're going to take those questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Occasionally, you might see us use chat to broadcast out links or just certain little pieces of information. But please, if you want to communicate with us and you want to actually submit a question, please use the Q&A button. So let's jump in and get started. The Smurfit MBA is a broad business and management MBA designed to develop global business leaders. There's three essential elements to how we go about doing just that. Firstly, our program is designed to expose you to current business and management thinking, delivered by leading teaching specialists recruited from across the world. Secondly, our MBAs engage in action learning throughout the program, from live case studies to business simulations to international consultancy. You really learn by doing. You'll study every topic through a global lens, you work in diverse teams, and you learn to lead in international environments. We aim to give you an immersive and diverse experience of case studies, invited guest speakers, group analysis, and teamwork. And the third element, to support you on your leadership journey, we have a co-curriculum leadership development program to equip you with the skills to manage diverse teams and organizations anywhere in the world. Our MBAs are an experienced group of participants from a wide range of specialities, sectors, and industries, and this eclectic mix contributes to a rich and stimulating learning and classroom environment. I'd like actually at this point to take the opportunity to specifically welcome anyone that is joining us today from overseas. For anyone that may not be familiar with UCD, University College Dublin is now amongst the top 1% of universities in the world and is Ireland's global university with over 30,000 students and still growing. A key question you should ask before you join us is, how does the school and specifically the program rank in a global environment? And the answer to both of those questions is very highly. To give you some context about UCD Business School itself, we were one of the longest established business schools in Europe. And in the context of the MBA, we're one of the earliest European innovators, launching our executive MBA program in 1964. So we were one of the first in Europe. In 1991, our first full-time MBAs graduated. And that was the same year we relocated here to Blackrock, which is an attractive suburb in South County Dublin. And the UCD Michael Smurfit Graduate Business School, as we know it today, was born. In 2000, the school became the world's first ranked school by the Financial Times, and we joined the SEMS network. And we're still the only school in Ireland to be part of this network, which is a global alliance of academic and corporate institutions and NGOs jointly delivering business education. We're the first school in Ireland to receive the prestigious Triple Crown accreditation from the awarding bodies in the US, the UK, and Europe, which is AACSB, Mba, and Equus. That happened in 2002. And just to put that in context, there are actually only 112 Triple Crown schools around the world out of over 11,000 business schools. So we really are in an elite group of 1% of business schools globally. In 2012, the school was invited to be a founding member of Genome, which is a global network of advanced management, a partnership of international business schools initiated by the Yale School of Management. So from a program point of view, our flagship MBA is consistently ranked by the Financial Times and The Economist in the top 100 business schools globally. So what does this all mean for you? As one of the oldest MBA programs in Europe, we have a track record and a reputation for delivering an outstanding program. Your Smurfit MBA is a globally recognized qualification with a significant reputation. And our history also means for you that we have by far the largest MBA global alumni base, an active and supportive network of over 4,000 MBA alumni and 90,000 business alumni worldwide. An element of the program that you'll benefit from is our alumni mentoring program, which is part of our careers planning activity. So let's focus now on the program itself, and I wanted to give you a flavor of the range of subjects you'll be doing. Some modules are core and some are optional, depending on your own choice of program, which Jessica will take you through later this morning. Now, some other MBA programs may look like they offer a similar portfolio, but what makes the Smurfit School MBA different is the strength and depth and experience of our faculty. If you stop any of our MBAs in the corridor on Monday and ask them what they appreciate most, it's always the quality of teaching, debate that happens in the classroom. Our strong industry links between the school and the corporate world mean that our academics are highly engaged with industry, which in turn allows them to bring the changing world of business into the lecture halls and bring it to life in a really engaging and practical way. New options are added frequently to the program, and I'd like to draw your attention to data analytics and digital transformation, which we've just added recently. There are a number of options which involve studying internationally that you can also choose from. One example is our Genome Global Immersion Week, which actually just happened in October for the full-time class. As members of Genome, our students get to choose from a range of week-long options in a network of 32 schools, such as Yale, Berkeley, Fudan, Oxford, where they get to choose from a range of subjects which they can study. UCD's Smurfit School is the only Irish member and provides additional international learning and networking opportunities for our MBAs. Another part of the program which is really popular is the Mba Capstone Project, another example of hands-on learning. This happens in the last semester for everyone, where we bring live business problems for real clients into the study teams and they work side by side with faculty to provide consulting services to solve those business issues. Now, I've deliberately skipped over doing business in international markets and our international consulting project because I wanted to actually go through those in a little bit of detail with you. They're a very popular part of your MBA and are designed to give you real international experience. Our MBA International Study Tour happens approximately midway in the program, and you visit companies from a multitude of sectors and industries in a particular country, as well as participating in workshops and networking opportunities. It's a real opportunity for you to get insight into the economic achievement and cultural and institutional practices of the country that we visit. Previous destinations have included Argentina, China, Singapore, Vietnam, South Africa. This year, our MBAs will visit Germany and Sweden. We're staying a little closer to home for obvious practical reasons. The MBA International Consulting Project takes place just before the Capstone Project, which I spoke to you about. You get here a chance to work with a company in a foreign location. For us this year, it will be Lisbon. And what's different about this module is you get to complete a live consulting project. These projects are carried out under a very tight time frame of approximately 4 days, and they include pre-engagement engagement with the company and a company presentation at the end. And really what this is a practical experience for you to put into practice everything that you've learned on your MBA before you return to us to complete your capstone project. Now, I also spoke earlier about the Leadership Development Program, or the LDP as we refer to it. And this is a program of set pieces of activity that help you develop your leadership skills in a range of situations. We work on your soft skills to build your awareness of yourself and how you are currently motivated and your own ability to manage yourself. And we then start to look at your team leadership skills and an awareness of those around you, and how you influence and how you manage teams. And then we look at your ability to able to manage others and your leadership qualities as a leader of people. We then build on that and through to your organizational leadership skills required to develop, implement, and communicate company vision and strategy. So as I said, the program is co-curricular. And what that means is it happens as you're studying. And there's a very close interplay between the leadership theory, which is interwoven into specific core module, and the actual LDP program itself. We bring it to life via your study teams, via your networking opportunities. We create alumni events for you to listen to other great leaders. We have our MBA clubs, which gives people an opportunity to actually take up leadership roles. And our class representative positions are also available. For our executive MBAs, what it actually means is gets a great opportunity to put learning into action in their current roles. Ultimately, what we're aspiring to do is to actually equip you with tools to take ownership of your own professional and personal development for the duration of your career. And we aim to achieve an appreciation for lifelong learning through the LGP program. Okay, so that has been a whistle-stop tour of the MBA, and I'm going to ask my colleague Paul to play a video now, which features our academic director, Cal Muckley, but it also will give you a feel for the UCD Smurfit School itself and give you an insight into the community that we've built here on campus. And I'll hand over to you now, Paul. Thank you.
Our MBA program is a world-class program. It's delivered in an excellent educational environment. We're a triple accredited business school, placing us among the top 90 business schools globally. Why are we a world-class MBA program? Why do we have a world-class MBA program? First and foremost, it's about the content that we deliver. So I'm thinking here naturally about economics, I'm thinking about entrepreneurship, finance, marketing management strategy, delivered by accomplished and experienced faculty and practitioners. Now, to complement this, we have a very impressive leadership development program. And this effectively develops the mentoring skills of our students, the influencing skills, and how they operate successfully in teams. When students arrive on the first day and look around, they can see immediately that it's a very international cohort in its own right. In addition to being an international cohort, the students arrive with a variety of excellent backgrounds, ranging from medicine to specialized areas of business, mathematics and physics, all in the same class, all learning how to solve business problems. So how do we develop this international theme further? Well, the UCD Smurfit School is a member of the Genome network. Now, this is a very special network of 30 top business schools globally, and students have opportunities to migrate for short spells between the different schools. So for instance, each year our students have an opportunity to visit Yale University, where they can take courses, debate and learn, and they find that to be very beneficial. In addition, we have an international study week abroad, where the students have a wonderful opportunity to observe excellent business in practice, succeeding in a very foreign environment. We've done this both in Asia and also in South America. We also have an applied study project whereby overseas businesses will set real-world problems that they face, and our MBA students tackle those problems using the skills that we develop with them on the program. So bringing all this together, we have a theme of globalization, a theme of internationalism that really changes the outlook of our MBA students as giving them the hard content, the language and the ideas of business, and really producing graduates with a new outlook on the world and who can perform very, very well in the international job market.
Great, thank you for that, Paul. Welcome back, everybody. So next, I'd like to introduce Jim Parr, who is an economist and is a current lecturer with us on the MBA programs. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, Adele. Good morning, participants. Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this. I am going to give you a brief sample lecture of what I typically deliver in class. A little bit about myself. I am a private sector economist working in the private sector for over 30 years. I was Treasury Economist at AIB Bank, Chief Economist at Bank of Ireland, and Chief Economist at Friends First, which is a pension fund manager. For the last 10 years, I've run my own economic and financial consultancy, working across many different sectors in the public and the private sector. I have published to date 3 books, one in 2009, another in 2017, and in fact, this week, I co-authored a book that's just been published on the SME environment in an Irish context. I also host a podcast called The Other Hand, and I am a graduate of University College Dublin with a BA in Economics and Politics and a Master of Economic Science degree. My approach to the MBA teaching is very much, and I guess given my background, this would be the case, but there's a mixture of academic theory and very practical application. So my approach really is I cover all of the relevant academic theory to give students an insight and an introduction into how the world of economics actually interacts on the real world of business. So in that regard, my academic theory is explained very much using real world business examples and very much also using practical examples of areas that I have worked in the past or are currently working in. My class tends to be very discursive. I absolutely encourage as much participation as possible, subject to limitations because we do have a course to finish, but there's a lot of interaction, there's a lot of discussion, and the feedback I get from my students, and indeed as a lecturer myself, I get it also, is that we learn so much from the vast range of experience across the class. And the academic director mentioned the sort of background in the video that the students come from, and that comes across very clearly during the class. And I think everybody ends up learning a lot from everybody else. And my aim in my business economics course really is to create an understanding and appreciation of how economics impacts on personal and business life on a day-to-day basis. So I talk about the role of economics in life and society. I talk about the role of politics, how politics interacts with the real world of business and economics. And I also cover the big global issues, stuff like the economic implications of climate change, demographic change, Brexit, all of these big, whatever the topic of global issues are, I try and cover them. I divide the class into, a focus on microeconomic theory, first of all, which is showing how economics impacts at the business level, at a very specific level. And I then go on and look at the sort of broader macroeconomic story to see how and what influences economic activity. And as I say, a key characteristic of my class is very much class interaction, and the vigorous debate is highly encouraged. So this morning, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to economics, and then I'm going to go on and look at and this would typically be my first couple of lectures where I look at what's happening in the world at the moment, what's happening here in the Irish economy, to give some perspective on that. And as I say, and I stress again, the whole time I am trying to relate all of this stuff back to how it actually impacts on people's personal lives, and I guess more importantly, how it impacts on the businesses in which they may work or may end up working at some stage. So the first thing to understand in the world of economics is actually what economics is all about. And one definition is that it's the study of how people make choices under conditions of scarcity and the results of those choices for society. So I guess the key point here is the word scarcity. Resources are by definition limited in supply. There's never enough of anything to go around. So if you superimpose on top of that reality of scarcity and scarce resources, finite resources, we have unlimited wants. So in other words, people, and this is human nature, people's wants are unlimited. We all want the best education system, we want the best roads, we want the best health services, we want to be paid as much as we can, and so on. So economics tries to marry these two concepts together, the concept of scarce resources and unlimited wants. And economics seeks to find solutions to how you solve these problems to try and come up with the best possible outcome. So the reality in the world of policy making is that choices have to be made between alternatives. We cannot do everything we want to do, so we have to make choices. And economics tries to provide a framework in which those choices can be made to the best effect. And in this analysis, I look at stuff like concepts like opportunity cost, which is the cost of an alternative foregone. So when a business makes a decision to do something, or a government, as in a policymaker, makes a decision to do something, by definition, it means that there's something else that we have to forego as a result of that. So if we decide as a government we want to invest an extra €2 billion in addressing climate change, it means that in an environment of finite resources, there's 2 billion less available to spend in some other area. So opportunity cost tries to give us a framework to look at how those choices can be made. I also go on and look at the whole concept of cost benefits analysis in policy making. It should be a key principle. You look at the costs of delivering a project, you look at the benefits that that project or that policy will deliver, and you then try, excuse me, and analyze how you come up with the best possible outcome. And another area that I go into in quite a bit of detail is the whole concept of evidence-based policy making. Evidence-based policy making basically involves using as much scientific evidence as possible when you're implementing policies to try and ensure that you achieve the best possible outcome. So it's a scientific approach to policy making. So this is a very quick introduction to what economics is all about. But I stress again that it's a really practical application of this. And I hope, I really strive every year to make sure that my students come out understanding these big economic issues, how they impact on them, but also understanding what policy making is all about, because we can all criticize politicians over decisions they make, sometimes with justification, oftentimes without justification. But I hope, excuse me, I hope I can provide a sort of a theoretical framework to understand how that policymaking environment operates. And I mentioned in my introductory slide that I also, cover the role of politics. And I have a quote here from a US economist called Thomas Sowell, who said that the first lesson of economics is scarcity. There's never enough of anything to give to all of those who want it. And the first lesson of politics is to disregard the first lesson of economics. So in other words, to understand the world of economics, you really do need to understand the impact of practical politics on economic outcomes. And I devote quite a lot of time in looking at that ongoing interaction between politics and economics and the benefits that flow from it, and more often the disadvantages that flow from it. And delving a little bit further, looking at the whole economic policy environment, some people regard economics as an incredibly theoretical subject that you need to be hugely mathematical to get involved in. But if you break it down, actually, it's nothing like that. And looking at the whole economic policy environment, you can break it down quite simply. What are the typical targets of policymakers? What are governments, what are central banks actually trying to achieve? Well, typically, it's stable economic growth, making sure an economy is growing at an acceptable level, low and stable inflation, making sure that inflation is neither too low nor too high, achieving full employment, trying to ensure that as many people as possible are working in an economy and a society, achieving external balance. In other words, trying to ensure that there is a balance between exports and imports in the system. Balanced regional economic growth, making sure that economic activity and development are spread to the regions. Infrastructure development, policies aimed at making sure that infrastructure is of a high quality as possible. And then we have the social objectives, such as reducing inequality. And I guess you could now superimpose on top of all of that, a key policy target is obviously climate change. And in an Irish context, that implies that by 2030, there is a commitment to reduce carbon emissions by 51%. So that process towards reducing carbon emissions, will have very significant economic policy implications. But typically, those are what policymakers are trying to target. And then we look at, how do they achieve those targets? Well, typically there are 4 instruments that are used. One is fiscal policy, which is using government expenditure and taxation. And in an Irish context, well, in an EU context, that is subject to EU constraints because of fiscal rules. Monetary policy is controlled by central banks, and it basically involves setting interest rates and money supply for the economy in which the central bank has responsibility for. And in an Irish context, the European Central Bank in Frankfurt sets monetary policy for us, as in the other members of the single European currency. A third policy option would be trying to manipulate the value of your exchange rate to try and influence the competitiveness of your external trade. And since Ireland joined the single European currency in 1999, we have lost control over exchange rate policy because we now enjoy the euro along with a number of other countries in the euro area. So exchange rate policy is a lot less influential in an Irish context, but exchange rate policy is still very important in the relationship between the United States and China, for example. And a final policy instrument is incomes policy, basically trying to control the growth in wages. And Ireland had an example of that between 1987 and 2009 called social partnership. So typically, these are the instruments available to policymakers to try and achieve the targets. And in reality, fiscal policy is by far the most important and influential, certainly at the moment, and certainly we've seen fiscal policy come to the fore since the outbreak of COVID back in March 2020. The objective of all of this, is to try and achieve the best possible outcome subject to economic, financial, and political constraints. And one of the problems here, of course, is the subjective nature of this. What is the best possible outcome? Different people will have different views on that. And these are the types of issues that I go into in a lot of detail in my class. Now, moving on, looking at the global economic situation at the moment, obviously since March 2020, the global economy has been subjected to an unprecedented set of circumstances, with the virtual locking down of economies and so on. And as the vaccine program has been rolled out to varying degrees, we've seen a gradual reopening of economic activity. And indeed, as economies have been reopened, we've seen a lot of pent-up demand come back into the system, and economic activity rebounding very strongly. But this is creating serious problems at the moment. So, for example, commodity prices across the board are under significant pressure, particularly energy. So, for example, so far in 2021, oil prices have increased 64%. Natural gas prices have increased by 109%. We have shipping chaos around the world and spiraling container costs. We have a serious shortage of semiconductors, which is causing serious problems for automobile manufacturing. We have a significant scarcity of construction materials, packaging, and indeed labor supply shortages are becoming evident in some sectors. So really what we're seeing are serious supply chain bottlenecks starting to cause serious problems. And the results are, why is this happening? Well, it's basically because, during COVID lockdowns, demand went into abeyance pretty much. And at the same time, a lot of production ceased because of the closure of sectors and economies. And suddenly, when you reopen those economies sharply, you're going to get a strong rebound in demand. And if a strong rebound in demand comes up against limited supply, you are going to have problems. And at the minute, and I think for the next 6 months or so, you will see those supply chain difficulties and bottlenecks really having a significant impact on the world economy. And indeed, the Economist magazine recently had a headline story called The Shortage Economy. And that pretty much sums up when excessive demand meets limited supply, what's going to happen. And another big global issue at the moment is a few months ago, we saw serious problems in the third largest property developer in China, Evergrande, and we're now discovering that there are a lot of other seriously indebted property development companies in China. And as China is the world's second largest economy, it's an issue that we need to watch very, very closely. This is a breakdown of GDP growth in the euro area. And in my class, I go in and explain in great detail, what GDP is all about and how you measure it. But I guess the interesting piece from this is you can see the absolute collapse in activity that occurred during COVID-19 out there on the right-hand side. And of course, there's been a strong rebound as economies have opened up. This is the US story. This is the UK story, all pretty similar. We have really lived through over the last couple of years, and indeed, unfortunately, continue to live through incredibly uncertain and unprecedented times. As a result of those supply shortages, inflationary pressures are starting to build in the system, and we've seen inflation rise 4 to 6% in Europe, United States, and so on. And central banks have a bit of a problem because in the context of COVID uncertainty, they are very reluctant to increase interest rates at the moment, despite the fact that inflation is rising, because they fear, with ongoing lockdowns, with COVID levels starting to rise again, that increasing interest rates could really do significant damage to the economic recovery story. So central banks are keeping official rates very low for the moment, and they're also engaging in aggressive bond buying to keep government borrowing costs down in order to facilitate the massive level of borrowing that governments around the world, including here in Ireland, have had to engage in response to COVID. So watch the evolution of inflation over the coming months. That will really be the center point for central bank activity. Moving on to the Irish economic growth story. Excuse me. Typically, the international metric for measuring economic activity is gross domestic product. That's used all over the world. But in Ireland, it's a little bit problematical because we have a huge level of foreign direct investment in this country. A lot of multinational companies operate here. And those multinational companies, at the end of every tax year, repatriate some of the profits back to their home country, typically the United States. So there's an outflow of money from Ireland. And what we're left with then is the grey line there, which is called gross national product. But in an Irish context, we also have, because largely for tax reasons, a lot of multinationals hold significant levels of intellectual property assets in this country. We also have a very significant level of aircraft leasing in this country. And those activities distort the real measure of economic activity. So the Central Statistics Office here has come up with a measure of economic activity called GNI star, gross national income star, which is the blue line. So, and as you can see there, it is significantly lower than gross domestic product. So what this demonstrates is that, and it's definitely what I try and hammer home to my students on an ongoing basis, is there the importance of being able to understand and delve beneath statistics to find out what's really going on. And that is a key focus of my teaching methodology, to try and create this critical analysis of basic statistics. Looking at the Irish economic story, we've seen significant restrictions in place since March 2020 to varying degrees. There has been a significant opening up of the economy since the middle of the year. Economic activity, like everywhere else, is rebounding very strongly, but there's a huge element of dual economy in Ireland. Foreign direct investment, professional services, public sector, financial services, very strong. Hospitality, non-essential retail, the airline industry, and personal services, very challenged. So in understanding what's happening in the Irish economy, it is vital to understand the differing impact that COVID had on different parts of the economy. And that is very much demonstrated in this dual economy situation. Now, I want to conduct a short poll before I discuss the housing market. So if I could hand back to Kathy to conduct the poll here. So the first poll question is, do you believe rapidly rising house prices and rents are good, bad, or don't matter for the economy? So if you could just tick your answer and submit, please.
So Jim, it's Kathy here. I've just ended the poll there. I'm not sure if you can see the results.
No, I can't actually.
Okay, so it's 8% good, 88% bad, and 4% doesn't matter.
Okay, an interesting answer, and I suppose for information purposes, I answered the poll as well, and I unambiguously answered bad. Okay, and I just want to talk a little bit about what's happening in the Irish housing market at the moment. You know, house prices and rents are growing very strongly. I would regard that as an economic bad, because unless you're an investor in property, consistently rising house prices, excessively rising house prices is no good, because it forced people to take on bigger mortgages and more debt. It damages the mobility of people if you want to move from one area to another, and if housing is too expensive or unavailable, that's a significant problem. So I just think rapidly escalating house prices and rents just sucks a lot of good resources out of an economy. And Ireland very much at the moment is in the midst of a massive rent and house price spiral. And the explanation for this is quite straightforward, really. And this is really what economics is all about. It's the interaction of demand and supply. Basically, between 2011 and 2020, we delivered just over 11,000 new houses per annum. We need about 35,000 per annum to satisfy the natural demand for housing because of our young demographic structure. So there is only one real solution to this: a strong supply side response. You address the planning system, you address services like water, you address the cost of building new houses to try and increase housing supply. Fueling demand side of the housing market is dangerous, although it is very often politically attractive. So Ireland's housing crisis is very much a demand supply problem. And this graph shows you what has happened to house prices. The blue line is the national average, the red line is outside of Dublin, and the green line is the Dublin housing market. And here we have some statistics just to show you, what's happening house prices at the moment. But suffice to say, at this point in time, house prices year on year are growing at sort of 12 to 14% per annum, which is way, way too excessive given the sort of house price growth we've seen in recent years. This is what's happening on the private rental side. You can see significant upward pressure out there on the right-hand side of that graph. That's a serious issue for the Irish economy. This is the housing completion story, and you can see there what has happened since 2011. Quite simply, we are not building enough houses. Now, another feature of the Irish economy is the very strong foreign direct investment part of our economy. We have a very successful model. 257,000 people employed directly by multinational companies, another 205,000 indirectly. Very strong linkages to the local economy. And it is a key part of Ireland's strategy out to 2025. Continue to grow this model, 800 new investments targeted, 50,000 new jobs. And this is really important for the Irish economic model. But as I've outlined in the book published this week, that while FDI provides a very strong opportunity for small and medium-sized enterprise companies, there is a significant need to focus much more specifically on the SME sector to make an even greater economic contribution in an environment where the foreign direct investment model will come under pressure from the global corporation tax agenda. Now, and this is my second and final poll question, and it relates to Brexit. So if I could put the poll question up. Okay, do you believe the United Kingdom made a sensible decision to leave the European Union? Yes, no, or don't know? Okay, interesting. 11% say yes, 84% no, 5% don't know. Okay, here again, that pretty much coincides with my view of the world. I think from a UK perspective, economically leaving the European Union, walking away from a market of 480 million people, free access to turn around and try and do free trade deals with countries hundreds of thousands of miles or thousands of miles away made no sense whatsoever. And here in Ireland, we have been particularly, concerned about Brexit because the UK has always been politically and economically a very strong trading partner of Ireland's. And since Brexit happened, the whole trading relationship between Ireland and the United Kingdom and Great Britain specifically has broken down significantly. The ability to sell food into the UK has been seriously distorted. And we've also seen a significant decline in imports from Great Britain. So Brexit has just seriously complicated that trading relationship across the Irish Sea. On the other hand, because of the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is the subject of significant political dissatisfaction and controversy at the moment, the trading relationship on the island of Ireland between Northern Ireland and the South has improved dramatically. But in an overall sense, and relating back to the question, the poll you answered, the UK's trading relationship with the European Union has been significantly damaged, and it's impacting much more aggressively on the United Kingdom than on the European Union. So this is an example of where politics supersedes economics, because Brexit was all about strange politics, had nothing to do with economics. And during my business economics course, I keep coming back to those sorts of issues, how political outcomes impact on economic outcomes. This is just, I'm going to wrap up very, very quickly. This is a review of what has happened Irish tax revenues over recent years. This looks at, analyzes government expenditure, and you can see there, particularly in response to COVID, gross current spending on providing day-to-day services has increased dramatically. This is a breakdown of tax revenues in Ireland in the first 10 months of the year. And when I am analysing economies in class, there is no better way to find out what's happening in an economy or in a sector than looking at what's happening on the tax revenue front. So I go through this in quite some detail, explaining how these tax outcomes relate to real economic activity. So finally, I mean, the outlook, global supply constraints now pose a real threat to the global economy. China will have to be watched very closely. The world's second largest economy, a more and more significant player in the global financial system, with serious debt problems and financial problems on the property development side, particularly. COVID-19 obviously has not gone away, and we're seeing this week again, unfortunately, the imposition of further restrictions to varying degrees around the world that will damage the global environment, economic environment. Climate change agenda, that is going to dominate global economic and political policy making for years to come, and so it should. Here in Ireland, we have a record level of savings because people basically couldn't spend very much during COVID-19. And indeed, this is consistent with what has happened around most of the world. We've seen so much money built up because the inability to spend, and all of that money is now starting to be unleashed. So it's creating these serious supply chain problems that we've spoken about. Labour shortages are becoming an issue in Ireland and indeed around the world. The OECD is pushing a very aggressive corporation tax environment at the moment. So that, that does pose a threat to Ireland. Housing, as I mentioned, is undoubtedly the biggest economic and political issue for Ireland, and is really impacting disproportionately on younger people here. Irish politics, what is there a risk here in Ireland that we start to move in the direction of the more extreme politics we see in countries like the United States? Indeed, Brexit in Britain was driven by extreme politics, and around the world we're seeing definitely greater political polarity, and inequality is driving this. So I would say at a global level, addressing inequality is up there with climate change as a big ticket agenda item. So the outlook does look cloudy at the moment. There is no doubt about that, because COVID is still with us, and COVID, we can already see the legacy that it has left, but unfortunately it is still an evolving story. So that's a very quick, perhaps not quick enough run through of one of my introductory type lectures for the MBA program. And as you can see, it's really trying to understand what's happening at a global level and how that feeds into people's lives and the lives of businesses. I have a podcast, as I mentioned, called The Other Hand. So if you wanted to hear this stuff 2 days a week, please sign up. So I will hand back at this stage, and I'd be delighted to take any questions over the next few minutes.
Great. Thank you so much, Jim. That was fantastic. Jim, just a question I have actually, which I think a lot of people on the call would be interested in hearing your view on. Obviously, a lot of people participating today will be very aware of the presence of very large multinationals in Ireland. You referred to them yourself, but we've become known as the Silicon Valley of Europe. And obviously, from an employment point of view, we will do everything within our power to retain those companies in Ireland, because I believe they're deeply embedded here. But just in terms of a new investment, how do you think we're going to fare now after the recent tax deal that was struck? And how do you think we're going to actually, continue to attract FDI into Ireland?
Okay, 257,000 people employed, another 205,000 jobs indirectly dependent. So it's a huge part of the Irish economic model, and indeed has been a huge part of Irish economic policy since the 1960s, attracting foreign direct investment. We've used a low corporation tax rate, 12.5%, as part of that strategy. And from 2023 onwards, it is now likely that we are going to have a 15% minimum corporation tax rate. I would say a move from 12.5 to 15 is not that significant. Okay, it's a little bit of a challenge, but it's not that significant. But what I would say is that Ireland's ability to compete for foreign direct investment on the basis of taxation alone is, strained. So we really do need to focus in on all of the other attributes we have to attract foreign direct investment. We are now the only native English-speaking country in the European Union since Britain left the European Union. So that's important for US companies, particularly, who, they appreciate an English language workforce, but also they more appreciate the access they get to the European Union market out of a country like Ireland. We need to focus in on the quality of the workforce, and that's why investment in education is just so important, because the available workforce is an incredibly important consideration for multinationals investing in a country. We need to make sure our public services like health, education is as high quality as possible, that our infrastructure, both physical and IT and social infrastructure, is as strong as possible. So these are all of the areas that we do need to focus in on. And I believe we will. And I do believe that Ireland will remain an attractive location for foreign direct investment. And as you said in your question, those companies are deeply embedded in Ireland at the moment. And quite frankly, I don't see that changing. So, and I guess this positions Smurfit Business School and the MBA program, very powerfully in the middle of this whole MBI ecosystem.
Super. Thanks, Jim. Our next door neighbours in the UK, their inflation rates are starting to seriously tick up now. I mean, do you see that as a temporary blip, Jim, or do you think they're on a different trajectory than the rest of us?
Sorry, Edel, could you repeat that?
Yeah, just our neighbour in the UK, their inflation rates are really starting to tick up. Do you see that as temporary, or is that something we need to be aware of?
Yeah, inflation everywhere is picking up very strongly. For the last 10 years, the world has been fighting the lack of inflation, and central banks have been trying to generate inflation because a certain level of inflation is actually desirable. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Too little or too much are bad, and we're getting too much at the moment. But it is very much a rebound from a very depressed COVID environment. So demand is being unleashed at the moment, and unfortunately, supply isn't catching up, and it's going to take some months for that to happen. So I think price rises are going to continue to be a feature of the environment, probably for about the next 6 months. Eventually, supply chains will get back on track, and those shortages will be addressed, and then you will see prices leveling off. But for the moment, it is a global phenomenon, and it's one that central banks are deeply concerned about, but are really reluctant to do anything significant about at the moment because of the COVID problems.
Yeah. And just on that, Jim, I'm just interested myself personally to kind of try and get a handle on how much resilience do you think there actually is in some of the bigger economies. I know we're talking about releasing personal spending, and that will boost consumer spending, but realistically, like how much longer can we all cope from an economic point of view with what's the impact of COVID?
Well, we have no choice. We've got to cope with it. Big events sort of change things dramatically. The First World War, for example, had such a profound impact on societies and economies and politics. The Second World War, less so. But COVID is another event up there like that. The legacy will live with us for years. And one of the legacies from a very practical economic perspective is there's a lot of government debt, because governments were told when COVID hit, get out there, spend as much money as you have to support your businesses and your households. And that has resulted in a lot of debt that will eventually have to be, it will have to be serviced. Eventually, some of it will have to be paid back. But that's a big legacy. But and people would criticize all of this government borrowing. But I would just put it the other way. If the governments had not borrowed this money, where would we be today? Because the objective was to make sure that once we came out of this exceptional situation, that those businesses and households that were there before COVID would be there after COVID to pick up the pieces. Because if governments had not intervened as they did, thousands of businesses would be gone. Households would be absolutely decimated. There was no choice. And this is another, I guess, good example of some of the choices that have to be made in economics. Thankfully, a choice at a global level was made that we really do need to support businesses and households through this. And we will come out the other end, albeit, there will be legacy issues, but there's no choice. We've just got to get on with it.
Yeah, great. Okay. All right, Jim. Thank you so much. We'll leave it at that, and I'll see you next week on campus, no doubt.
Yeah. Thanks,
Super, Jim. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that.
Great. So next, I'm going to ask my colleague Mark to actually come on. Hi, Mark. How are you?
Hi, Del. I'm great.
Good,
Thank
good,
you very
good.
much. Good morning, everyone. And thank you so much again for joining us today. So my name's Mark, and I'm the MBA Careers Manager at UCD Smurfit. So I look after the careers programs and the career support for our full-time and our executive, including the Modular Program. So a little bit about me first. So I've been with the school almost 4 years, and prior to that, I spent 10 years working for a business school in London. So while I'm still not quite an Irish citizen, I have many years experience working in business schools and with MBA students. So I just want to share one slide with you first, and then I'll be joined by a couple of our alumni to talk through how the MBA's impacted their careers. But just share a slide about the careers service. So hopefully there you can see just an overview of our career supports and also some information about some employment information about our recent classes. I don't want to go through this in any detail. You can obviously read more online, but I want to maybe pull out a couple of things that make us a little bit different in our approach. So really, the first thing to say is because UCD Smurfit MBA has such a great network, and particularly in Ireland, a real focus of the career service and the program is to connect with alumni. So we focus a lot of our training on networking skills, and then also providing you with networking opportunities with those alumni. And I know Ruth and Gaurav, for joining me this morning, have been involved in those. So we would have things like alumni panels. This trimester we've had panels of alumni talking to our students about tech careers and about consulting careers, and giving them advice also on job hunting. We also use alumni for our mentoring program, which is part of our full-time careers program, and also for mock interviewing. So for giving our students interview practice to get them ready for those real job interviews. So that's kind of a real focus of what we do. I also wanted to maybe discuss a couple of differences, because some of you might be thinking, you know, do I study full-time? Do I study part-time on the executive? So with a full-time class, really, because if you join that, you would be in a class where everyone is job hunting and everyone is really looking to change sector and or role. We will put you through a structured program there, a series of workshops and interventions to get you ready for applying for jobs in the spring and hopefully getting a role for the summer or the autumn. So it's quite structured. With the executive MBA, though, if you were to join one of those classes, I mean, firstly, some people are looking for change, but others are looking to stay within the organisation and progress. And those who are looking for career change, and we have some people looking in year 1, some in year 2, and actually we provide a full access to the careers service for up to a year post-graduation as well, because many people actively job search after the executive MBA. So because of that, there's not such a structured program. It's a bit more biased towards kind of one-to-one and online activities, and really means you can, and some repeat workshops, you can kind of dip in whenever it's relevant to you. And that's really kind of reflected on our employment data as well. So there's a high degree of career change on the full-time MBA, but there's also a lot of career progression amongst our participants on the executive MBA programs. So that's probably all I wanted to say on the careers service for now. Obviously happy to take questions in the Q&A at the end. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and welcome our alumni. And I see Ruth and Gaurav have joined us this morning. I'm afraid I'm going to have to say apologies on Pete's behalf. He's obviously not managed to log in yet. So welcome, Ruth and Gaurav. Good to see you again, albeit virtually. So great, if we could, thank you for taking the time this morning to chat with the participants and with me. like to, if I may, because I know we kind of put your details up on the first slide this morning, but if you could just remind our audience of who you are, maybe whether you study full-time or part-time with it on the executive programs, who you're working for, your role, and what your responsibilities are. So Ruth, if I could start with you.
Great, thank you, Mark, and good morning. Nice to see you again. And hi, Gaurav. It's been ages.
Hey,
How
Ruth.
are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm great. So, a little bit about myself then. I studied on the Executive MBA from 2016 to 2018. Actually, sitting here listening to Jim this morning, reflecting on the fact that it's been 3 years, and I'm well, almost 3 years since we finished, and I'm kind of a little shocked by that, but hey, you know, COVID I think has made the last year and a half pass in a blur for all of us. So I work for Kellogg Europe. So Kellogg's being the largest cereal manufacturer in the world, we're also a very large snack company. We own the Pringles brand worldwide. It's our biggest snacking brand, and I've been with Kellogg's for over 13 years. Our European headquarters is here in Dublin, so I am one of the 250 something thousand people employed by an American multinational in Ireland, when we have quite a big organization here. I think it's around about 250 people right now. So a lot of Kellogg Europe operations, and also the Kellogg Company of Ireland, which is the business that runs the sales and marketing organization here in Ireland. My current role is general manager of what we call high growth markets. So just a small group of 27 markets covering the Nordics, Central and Eastern Europe, the Baltics, and the Mediterranean region. So everywhere from Iceland all the way through to Greece. And I've finally been able to travel to a couple of those in the last couple of months, which has been wonderful. But I've been doing this role for about 16 months or so. But the first year or so, I was completely, as everybody else was, in lockdown and doing it all virtually. So I have full P&L responsibility for delivering the Kellogg's business in those markets, and I have large sales and marketing organization reporting to me, people in places like Helsinki, Copenhagen, Bucharest, Athens, amongst other places. So that's a little bit about me. The other thing to say is I am a mum of two, so my kids are now 9 and 11, but they were just, I think, 4 and 6 when I started in 2016. Again, I was trying to figure that out this morning. So yes, I did manage to be mum full-time, work full-time and study at the same time. It is possible.
Thanks, Ruth. That's something that regularly comes up at these sessions, is a lot of our executive MBA students had young children at the time, or did babies during the program.
Yes.
So
we have a whole we have a whole group of MBA babies that were born during the MBA. Yeah.
A bit of a baby boom on the program. Yeah. Thanks, Ruth, and Gaurav, if I could turn to you now.
Yeah, so my daughter is an MBA baby. She was 3 weeks for my graduation. I did my EMBA as well, 2016, 2018. So Ruth and I were in same batch. She was a weekend class. I was in the weekday class. I work for Accenture. So Accenture is a large consultancy company, $50 billion revenue in year that just closed. Within Ireland, we employ about 10,000 odd people across Cork and Dublin. I am within financial services sector within Accenture, and specifically within payments. And my day job is I lead a open banking program for one of the pillar banks in Ireland. So I'm a program manager, and I'm delivering a certain capability on behalf of the bank. And then some additional work that we do for Accenture, some business development, some thought leadership. So that is more or less my day.
Yeah, both sound like very busy, big roles, so appreciate you taking time out of your Saturdays. And just before my next question, I should remind people that if they have any questions for either Ruth or Gaurav, please pop them in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen, and we will get to those after my questions. So Ruth, I think I wanted to ask you next, maybe if you could just talk, if you can remember back to your kind of career prior to the MBA, and maybe sort of tell us how that was going and sort of why you came around to thinking, you know, that an MBA would be a good thing to do at that point in your career, and why it was the right time for you as well.
Yeah, sure. So about a year before I started the MBA, I was at what I would look back now and call a frustration point in my career. So, you know, I had progressed to a certain level in the organization, and had moved laterally a couple of times to broaden my experience, but I wasn't particularly loving the role I was in, and I was struggling to see exactly where my path would go. And I did some work internally in Kellogg with a mentor. I purposely picked somebody who I knew would challenge me, and this person and I worked through a longer term career path, and you know, quite a bit of personal reflection over a couple of months about what I wanted to do ultimately in the future. And I settled on the area of general management as a goal, and then I mapped my career, and my roles prior to this had been all in the sales and commercial arena. So you know, I was yes, I was getting a certain breadth of experience, but it was very much within one area of the business. And it seemed quite natural at that point then to talk to the company about doing an MBA, because I had a very clear, at that stage I had a clear goal that I wanted to go for, and an MBA was identified by me and then validated by those that I worked with as a great way to fill in the gaps in my knowledge and to broaden my experience and my perspective that would take me in the general management direction. And ultimately, I wasn't even finished the MBA. I was about a year and a half through when I was promoted to my first general management position.
Thanks, Ruth. And Gaurav, was your decision? So it sounds very well thought out, Ruth. Was yours well thought out, or was it more on the spur, or is it something you've been looking to do for a while?
It was a combination of all. It definitely wasn't as thought out as Ruth's. So there was a bit of a herd mentality there as well. So I did my engineering from India, and it's very common in India to do your engineering, get some work ex, and do MBA. Intent always was to do a full-time MBA, but much earlier in the career than when I did. But life happened. I ended up in Ireland, which was not on the plan. Moving out of India was never on the cards. I came here and I was doing well. I didn't really think, I really dropped the idea of MBA, but then came to a stage in my career where I just stagnated. Like when I started looking for roles outside, I used to for Oracle at that time, and I started looking for jobs outside Oracle, but the roles that I was getting were all lateral moves. So the idea of MBA reignited. I did research for about 2 odd years. So 2015, 2016 is when I joined, but starting late 2014, I attended a lot of these seminars similar to this experience days. And in 2016, I finally jumped in and did my MBA.
Thanks, Gaurav. And just a quick kind of follow-up question there. Obviously, Ruth, you kind of were talking this through with your employer. Do you get much support from them in terms of kind of either funding or time off from the MBA?
I did, Mark, yes. And again, it wasn't necessarily a formal program that was available, looking at policies. But when I reached out with the idea, talked to my manager at the time, it was possible. So I did get financial support from the company, and then as Gaurav said, I was on the weekend program, which was Friday afternoon and Saturday morning. So I had an informal agreement with my manager at the time to say that I would be off site on Friday afternoons, would take calls if was required, and obviously I was working hours during the week at other times. So I had an informal time arrangement which worked well for me and for my employer. So yes, I did. I got significant support from the company.
Thanks. And what about you, Gaurav?
Yeah, so very similar. So when I enrolled into MBA, I used to work for Oracle, but a week before MBA started, I moved to Deutsche Bank. So I did get some sort of financial support from Oracle, but I had to return that money. Similar with Deutsche, I joined Deutsche a week before my MBA, and I left it about a week after final classes ended. So I got some financial support from Deutsche as well, which I had to return. But the time support was critical. Like, so I had my classes on Mondays and Thursdays. College was about 10 minutes drive from house and about 70 minutes from office. So Mondays and Thursdays, I was never in office. I was always at home. But then even like the leadership at Deutsche, like even some of the MDs were aware that Mondays and Thursdays I leave a bit early, and they would schedule their calls accordingly if I was critical to those calls. So yeah, there was financial support, but there was also a lot of time support. Like they were very conscious of when I have my exams, and I'll be less available during my exams. So that support was very critical to MBA.
Yeah, and I think most of our students would agree that the time support is almost the more critical, because it's a very demanding program. And I'm great to see that Pete has been able to join us. So hi, Pete. I might just skip back to you and ask you to. I think you're all 2018 grads actually by chance. Yeah. Yeah, we didn't necessarily pick it that way on purpose, but Pete, so obviously you were with us on the full-time program. If you can just introduce yourself and tell us, I know you're in quite a new job, but where you're working now and what your responsibilities are. And maybe I'll wrap my second question in as well in terms of sort of what you were doing pre-MBA and kind of why you decided to study an MBA.
Yeah. So thanks very much for having me on this morning, Mark. But it's I suppose I took maybe a slightly, I'll answer the second part of your question first. So I took a slightly more circuitous route, I think, to doing an MBA than a lot of people would have. And I think that's probably one of the differences that I found between the part-time class and the full-time class, in that I found that the people in the full-time class were maybe making a complete switch, or the majority of people were making a huge switch in their career, maybe a slightly younger age profile as well, not by much, but a slightly younger age profile. Whereas people in the part-time class, the exec class, were maybe advancing a little bit more. Now that's not always the way, but I was an army officer. So I came in after spending 8 years in the Irish Defence Force. So I was a captain in the army. I just come back from a year overseas in West Africa. And it was a complete, I suppose, shift for me, and it was fantastic as well, because I landed. I really didn't. I needed to build up my I suppose my commercial acumen, and the best way to do that was to get as deep as quick as possible, and the MBA certainly did that for me, and it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant, in terms of like kind of shaking things up for me and making my career move in a different direction that I wanted it to do. Since then, I suppose I've spent the last 3 years working with the UI in an advisory capacity in the people advisory services. And then recently I've moved to Qualtrics. We're a tech company in the experience management market. And I am working as a partner delivery manager. So I'm working with our partners to expand our sales organization outside of the traditional client model, to working with organizations like UI in EMEA to expand out the way that we're selling our Qualtrics platform and our advisory services based off that. So looking at customer experience and employee experience primarily in the EMEA region, to look at why people are staying in their jobs, leaving their jobs, why customers like the products and why they don't like the products. So that's really kind of, I suppose, as much as I know at this stage, because I've only been in the door 3 weeks. So please don't push me too much more on that, Mark. But yeah, I think it's been a complete change for me in terms of my own career, and the MBA was certainly the kind of the catalyst to drive that. So yeah, really enjoyed it, and the spin so far after the MBA has been fantastic too.
I was going to say that was quite a slick overview of your current role, given that you've just walked in the door. You seem to know it well enough.
In surface, Mark.
He works in sales now, so he has to.
Yeah. He has to know it. Okay, and the question, the obvious question that I haven't asked you all yet, is we've talked about kind of why you decided to do an MBA, but then narrowing that down, what was it about Smurfit that you know, made this the right program for you and the right location? And Ruth, again, if I could start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I spoke to quite a lot of people, and similar to Gaurav, I attended days like this, and don't want to tease you all, but we were able to go in person at the time, and meet some grads, and I knew a couple of people who had done MBAs, both well, not both, but at Smurfit, but also at some other schools in Dublin as well. And ultimately, it was the quality of the program at Smurfit that really drew me to it, particularly in the reputation sphere, and the quality of the lecturers. And I was listening to Jim's lecture before, and he was talking about using real life examples in class, and I mean, I have now 100 examples of that. It really is true. The lecturers really work on examples that are relatable, and examples that are memorable, and a lot of in-class discussions. So all in all, I heard a lot of very positive feedback about the Smurfit MBA, and that, coupled with the reputation, was what pushed me towards choosing Smurfit.
Thanks, Ruth. And Gaurav, were you aware of Smurfit before you came to Ireland, or is it sort of the choice you made when you got here?
No, I wasn't. If I'm very honest, I was aware of the competitor though. But when I started looking at the MBA, like there are basically 2 programs in Ireland worth looking at, and I attended experiences in both places. Obviously, Smurfit is better ranked, so that helps. But even the experience from experience days made me tilt towards Smurfit. And then I spoke to a few people who were ex-MBAs, but also like I spoke to the lady who used to head up recruitment within our practice in Oracle, and advice everywhere was Smurfit. So I was like, okay, if recruiters prefer Smurfit, then Smurfit it is. But that was more of a validation of the decision that I've already made based on my experience at experience days. So that was it for me.
And Pete, finally with you, was there ever any doubt?
Well, I think probably not too dissimilar to Ruth. I knew some people who had been through the program, and I think it's always a lot easier when you can see someone who is in a similar role to you, who's been through the process, so you know you can do it. You know that the time pressure isn't going to be too much on you, and that you're academically capable of completing the program, because it can be a little bit daunting, I suppose. And knowing someone who'd done it before was great. And I think for me, the real clincher for me in terms of Smurfit was I came from a fairly non-diverse background in terms of the organization I worked for was generally people of a similar age group, similar sex, and from a very similar ethnic background. And I wanted to get an international experience, and that's certainly what I got. I think out of my class of about 30, there were 17 or 18 internationals in the class, and it was something that I had identified before, that I was going to, first of all, I wanted to gain international experience in terms of people who had worked in the international market, and secondly, I knew that in the job market that I'd be going into, that I'd no longer be working with people of a very similar kind of makeup to myself, and that was really what clinched it for me, and that's exactly what I got. Jumping into groups straight away with 3 people from completely different backgrounds to me, completely different thought process to me, and it really kind of allowed me, I think, to take a step back, I would certainly have been from a background where we'd rush to a decision very quickly, and coming up from meeting people with from very different backgrounds, very different kind of process, the way that they worked and thought was absolutely fantastic. So yeah, kind of international friend for me, really, Mark, that clinched in the end.
Thanks, Pete. And I think that kind of leads me to my next question. So I might come straight back to you in terms of what you've been able to apply from the MBA. Obviously, that was one of your reasons for, you thought that was a gap, and has that play? I mean, bit of a leading question, but has that played out then in your kind of post MBA career? Has that experience of working in those international teams and being able to kind of think differently, is that something that you found useful? And are there other elements from the MBA that you've particularly been able to apply and have really impacted your career?
Yeah, I think so. I came from a management background where I was leading groups of about 30 people, but again, they're all very similar background to myself. They're all kind of Irish, generally males in the region of 20 to 40. And very quickly you find yourself in a situation where you're managing a completely different group of people. When I was in EY, it would have been people of different ethnic backgrounds, people coming to Ireland for a variety of reasons. And people with very different academic backgrounds to myself in general, a lot smarter than I am too. So I think kind of working with groups of people who are their skill sets lie in different areas to myself, and people who are from those kind of different backgrounds in group settings really kind of set me up for what I was about to do straight away afterwards, which is kind of manage small teams of people who have different motivations and whose career ambitions are entirely different to my own. So yeah, it was brilliant, and it kind of set me up for what I would literally do as soon as I walked in the door of my new employer. So yeah, it did.
And I'm sure will be at least as relevant at Qualtrics as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, straight away, yeah.
And Ruth, you talked earlier about having actually made the kind of jump that you wanted to happen for you, I think, during the second year of the MBA, kind of before you'd actually completed it. I mean, it might be hard to kind of pull it apart, but do you feel that the MBA kind of was a reason for that, or and have there been kind of, that if you compare the sort of Ruth now to the Ruth pre-MBA, are there elements of the MBA that you can point to that you would say sort of make you more effective for Kellogg as an employee nowadays?
So to the last part of your question, yes, for sure. There, I do refer, quite frequently to different elements of programs that that we worked on, particularly in the strategy area. It comes up for me quite a bit, and I referenced before the markets that I work on. We call internally in Kellogg's high growth markets, and I have a significant role in developing our company strategy for how we will go to market in 5 years' time in Central and Eastern Europe, for example. And I've been back through various different modules that are parts of modules that we worked on through the MBA. And then the other thing, which I know somebody's going to mention, so I'm going to say it first, is the cohort that you go through the MBA with, right? Not only do they become friends, but also that the WhatsApp groups are priceless, as in you couldn't buy the brain power that is in that WhatsApp group, and what you get in there is a group of people who know you because they have experienced working with you in different group settings through 2 years, and also don't have any political reason not to help you, right? So from a work point of view, often questions will get put into the WhatsApp group, and people get back the most amazing answers from the cohort that they went through on. So the WhatsApp groups are something that that are really, really wonderful as we go the whole way through. But to go back to the first part of your question, would I have gotten the role that I got if I didn't do the MBA? I think I might have gotten my first general management role, but I've moved on to my second, much larger one now. And, you know, now that I'm kind of a year and a bit into that one, I'm already thinking about what comes in, you know, another year and a half's time, 2 years' time. So I think I would have got there, maybe not as quickly, but certainly wouldn't have been able to move on as quickly as I have done, and had the breadth of opportunities open to me that are open to me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. And I think that's the other thing that consistently comes up from alumni who join these sessions is, number one, the small children is doable with the MBA, and number two is the WhatsApp group. It always seems to be a WhatsApp group of essentially free strategy consultants.
Yes,
post MBA.
Yeah, good way to describe it.
And Gaurav, what about you? Obviously, you worked. You made a move during the MBA as well, I think. But what are there specific elements of your program that you sort of particularly found useful in your career since?
Yeah, so both the jobs, Deutsche and Accenture, I didn't really get them because of Accenture, because of MBA, but I joined Accenture in 2018, November 2018, and I got promoted in August 2019, which was a very quick promotion, and MBA played a big role in there. So like, if you would ask me before MBA, what modules would I be thinking, and I would have said marketing, strategy. What really helped me was organizational behavior, which probably I didn't even know existed. So I was leading a team of, it was a multi-vendor team, lots of politics, very conflicted team, lots of challenges. And I actually started really going through my notes of organizational behavior and just figuring out how do I encourage the right behaviors. And how my mentor at that time described that, like, basically you took on a team which was underperforming to a team which was overperforming, and that played a very big role in my promotion. So MBA has definitely helped me in that sense. And even today, like, I do find myself, if I'm in a particular situation, I do find myself going back and looking at my notes. One of the very senior stakeholders at a client, she's a chartered accountant, and I have nothing to do with accounts, but one of the things we do is when the client results are out, we probably discuss some of the results. I could not have made sense of the results before I did my accountancy module. So the fact that I can just engage her, even though it may not directly help my career, but it does help me indirectly to build those relationships, to build those network.
Thanks, Gaurav. So the importance of making good notes.
And I think, Mark, on that point, if I can just back up what Gaurav has said, you know, some of my colleagues fell around the place laughing when they heard that I was doing finance exams, right? I mean, I'm ultimately a salesperson, and they're like, oh my God, Rich, you just round things to the nearest 100,000, right? Now I've passed exams in management accounting, corporate finance, you know, financial accounting, and it does give you a level of legitimacy with your colleagues because you can have the right conversations with them, even if I still round things to the nearest 100,000.
Yeah, and again, that always comes up is the confidence in different areas and the ability to kind of talk, you know, with credibility to other parts of the organization is another theme that comes through. And picking up on what you've all said, I think, you know, as a career service professional, I'm always keen to kind of stress, and you've said this, that you know, the return on investment of the MBA, I think pre-MBA, everyone focuses on the next job or the first job, but, which is obviously important, but I think, you know, actually the return is often kind of well beyond that, and should be well beyond that, kind of deeper into your career. I'm going to turn now, actually, I see my colleague Adele has popped back up, which is, I think, is a sign for me to stop talking, and the fact that we've had
you got it.
a number of questions come in from our audience. So we want to make sure we've had enough time to for Adele to pose those to you. So Adele.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. Just the questions were building up here, so I said I'd better interject myself. Good morning, Peter. One of the first questions is actually for you. Someone is asking if you had a part-time job when you were completing your full-time MBA, and is it possible, or the demands of the course too much?
I did towards the end. So I work a little bit as a leadership development consultant, and I did towards the very end of the course. I worked maybe, it could have been 4 or 5 days really, but there were a few people with specialities in our course, like pharmacists, and there was one guy who was a doctor, and they continued to do a little bit on weekends. I'd say the big answer is probably no. You don't have time. There was no one with a full-time job. There were 1 or 2 people who, as I said, were pharmacists, might have done a little bit of locum work on the weekend. Not much at all. And you know, that time that they spent locuming was time that they weren't spending on the kind of the coursework that needs to be done, and they make it up during the week, because it is intensive over the year. There's a huge time ask on your time, and it's also something that you probably should consider from a kind of family point of view, etc. You're going to be there an awful lot of the time, and it's probably the best part about it is from the full-time course point of view, you're all there all the time. It's probably the main difference, obviously, between the exec and the full-time is that you're entirely invested in it, and you're there all day.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Peter. Jessica will come on and talk about the 3 options there are to actually undertake the MBA, but in our experience, as a full-time student, you have very little work, and certainly very little time, I should say, and certainly very little time to actually be working at the same time. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is a general question to the panel, so if anybody has any experience of this, maybe just jump in and answer. But we have someone in the audience who has been offered support, financial support from their company to actually undertake the MBA. But in return, they're being asked to sign maybe a 2-year contract when they return to their company. And they're just really wondering, is that usual, unusual? Has anybody any experience of it?
So I had to do it both with Oracle and Deutsche. And because I left within 2 years, I had to reimburse both. Now, okay. I managed to get something out of Accenture as well. So 3 companies paid for my MBA and had to reimburse 2 of them.
Okay, thanks, Corey.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I think it's pretty commonplace to protect the company's investment. I didn't move company, but others within my class did, who had received support, and some of them received some signing bonus from their new company in order to make up for the money they had to give back to the previous company.
Great, I understand. Super. Now, we also have a question in, and again, it's to anyone in the panel who feels they'd like to answer it, about if you hadn't undertaken the MBA, and actually a couple of people have asked this question, where or how do you feel your career would be at the moment?
Few years behind what it is now. Like I probably would have gotten to the stage, but probably would have taken longer.
Yeah, so it's really about the acceleration of the career path you've had to date.
Yep.
Super.
I would say,
sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I would say similar to Gaurav, but I would also say that I probably wouldn't have had some of the opportunities that I've had. So, you know, when you are in one function in particular, I think you can get pigeonholed. And I was 15 years in one function. And I think you become, you know, sometimes very much a subject matter expert within a company. I'm not that anymore, and I'm much broader. So I get asked for my input on much broader topics, and my credibility on that basis is increased as well.
I think my one would be that, like, so I was a complete career switcher, so I was going for a career switch. I took a year out, did the MBA, but I met the partner who hired me in EY at the MBA or at the Smurfit Awards, and then my job that I just got now, Mark gave me the introduction to Qualtrics. So both of my jobs have come straight from Smurfit, and it's always the informal things that get you them. You know, it's never back of a management accounting class, sorry. No, that's not what you want to hear, but it's always the informal networking stuff that you do on the side, the extra bits that work out, you know.
And just when you say that, Pete, actually there's a one of the, I can't remember if he was 2017 or 2018 full-time MBA, is now working at Kellogg since he graduated. And
Marcelo?
Yes, Marcel, yeah. I only just saw him the other day in the office. Marcel had applied to Kellogg's, but hadn't been called for interview, and he spoke to me. I spoke to the hiring manager, who pulled his CV out and who said, "Oh my God, he's perfect," and hired him, and he's still there. He's still at Kellogg's now, whatever, 3 years later.
Yeah, and Smurfit name it's a very big name in Ireland. Like my manager at that time on Oracle, when I was going to do MBA, he did not even know that Smurfit was part of UCD. He was like, like Smurfit by itself was such a big name. He's like, "Are you going to Smurfit?" I'm like, "Yeah." And then I asked him for a referral, and he saw UCD there. He said, "I thought you were going to Smurfit." And I'm like, "Yes, Smurfit is part of UCD." So it's a very big name in Ireland, and it does help.
Super. Okay, Mark, do you mind if I ask you a question? So we have an audience member who'd like to know if how big an influence on recruiters does having an MBA in your experience?
Yeah, that is a big question. Look, I mean, the MBA is you at the end of the day. So, you know, that I would say there are jobs, obviously, where you have to have an MBA for them. And obviously, I mean, clearly there you need to have studied the qualification. And there are jobs where it's, you know, which probably more commonly, it's on the job description as a kind of nice to have. And then there are jobs where, you know, there's no MBA on the job description at all. But the one thing common to all three is it's really just down to how good you are at talking about the value of it. So, you know, much as our alumni have done today is being able to identify what's transferable from what you're doing on the MBA to the new role. And it's not going to be 100% of it. So you've got to just understand from your previous experience and adding to that what you're doing on the MBA, what you're learning on the MBA, why that's making you a better potential candidate than the next person. So there's not really kind of, it is down, no, 99% of it is down to how you communicate it. And that's obviously a big part of what we do in the career service, is to help you do that effectively, whether that's on the CV, at interview, in your networking conversations, you know, but as Ruth and Gaurav and Pete have said as well, I mean, there is the network effect as well. So of course, you know, there are introductions and it can get you kind of a seat at the interview table, but then the rest is kind of down to you.
Super. Okay, I have a question here, which again, anyone please feel free to answer, but someone is asking how big of a demand are the project and assignment deadlines that come as part of the coursework submission?
Significant, very significant. Like, do not. One of the advice I received from one of the alumni when I joined Experience Day was, your entire family is going to do MBA with you, because if you're not in class, you're back home doing your assignments and your coursework. So it's a very significant demand on your time.
I don't know how the execs do it. Like, it's incredible to work as well. In the full-time class, I actually found that the pressure was maybe a little bit less, because it was all you were doing. So it was all I was doing every day was, you know, thinking about my MBA. But it's a different pressure, I think, as an exec to do it. But I think it would, like, I always find that when I'm at my busiest, when I'm at my most productive. And so I think that, you know, it's just a different gear. It's like anything. It's like having kids or whatever, changing jobs. Just get used to it, and it becomes the normal thing that you do. And it helps that you have really good classmates. You can kind of lean on them too. Yeah.
Ruth, would you like to contribute to that answer? And then maybe another little sidebar to that, which is specifically a question for you, has come in from the audience about balancing work, the MBA, and time with your family.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem. I mean, so first of all, it is possible. I would say that. I agree with both Gaurav and Pete to say, yes, the time demands are significant. So understand that, and you know, and make sure that your stakeholders in your personal life particularly understand that that's critical. But reflecting back now, I say I am a much more efficient person than I was before I did the MBA. So what I personally did, and I had massive support from my husband because, as I said, I had two kids. We agreed once I understood what the time demands would be, which you find out very quickly, because things go fast from day one. We sat down, my husband and I was really, really clear about the guardrails around when I was going to be available and when I wasn't. And for example, the way I worked it was, I said evening time when the kids are gone to bed, so kids were in bed at 8 o'clock, I will be working on my coursework in the evenings. So kind of between 8 and whenever I was going to bed. And I did that Monday to Thursday. Friday evening, Friday afternoon, I was at lectures. Saturday morning, I was at lectures. Religiously, I did not do any college work on Saturday afternoon or Sunday. Again, I was just really clear that that was time with my family. They knew and understood that. And I also made that really clear with my group colleagues on whatever projects I was working on. I can't do group calls. I can't do whatever it is on a Saturday or Sunday. So I just chunked my time up and I was really, really efficient with it. Just one other thing as well, and when I mentioned the efficiency, this is an example I share with people. One of the best pieces of advice I got from MBAs, previous MBAs alumni, was do not get behind ever. From day one, you have to go, you have to keep up, right? And it was honestly the best piece of advice. And the system helps you to keep up, right? Because you're working with groups and you can't really fall behind because you're going to let other people down. So yeah. I kept up from day one and I just became so efficient. So I was traveling quite a bit to the UK for about 6 months during the time I was studying. And my trips through the airport and on the plane, and it's only a short flight, right? But there's time everywhere. So if I had case studies to read, and I'm looking at Pete smiling, right? He recognizes this. There's time everywhere. I used to go through the security straight to a corner close to the gate. And I would have a case study read before it was time to get on the plane. And then I got on the plane, I sat down and I would have notes made before the plane took off. And, you just become really, really, really sharp. What do I need to do? Okay, I'm just going to get it done. And you just work through it. And that's how it worked for me. And I did it. I survived and nothing fell apart. And my kids were fine because they knew when I was available. And my husband was hugely supportive.
Thank you so much, Ruth.
Just to add to that, right? Like time management is like, if you don't learn anything from MBA, you will definitely learn time management.
Yeah.
I found a software which would read PDFs for you. And during my commute in car, my case studies were being read to me.
Yeah.
And the habit that it has cultivated is now I listen to podcasts in car.
Yeah.
So you just cultivate some good habits that just stick with you.
Yeah. Super. Thank you, Arl. Lovely. Okay, panel, that has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. We're going to leave it at that. If you don't mind, we need to move on to our next session, which is with my colleague Jessica Dowling. So we've had a lot of questions coming in about the practicalities of the different MBAs, how to apply, etc., etc. So Jess, if you're ready, I shall hand over to you. Thank you so much, everybody, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers.
Great. Thank you so much, Adele, and thank you so much to our panel there. That was so interesting. And I think a lot of the questions that I would get in as well as an admissions manager were really answered there, just around time management and working with families and everything like that. So I'm now going to take you through slightly more kind of practical side around applying. Let me just share my screen now. Give it a moment to pop up. So just to introduce myself again, my name is Jessica Dowling and I am the Admissions and Recruitment Manager looking after the 3 MBA programs that we offer here at the Smurfit School of Business. So I look after everyone from initial inquiry through the application process itself, interview stage, and then onboarding until you kind of join us here in the school. So probably the first thing to talk about is hopefully you've thought after today and if you've attended other events that you would love to apply to our program. So we offer rolling admissions and we are open for applications at the moment. So we have one intake a year to our 3 MBA programs, and that intake is begins always at the very end of August each year. So you always start with a foundation week, which starts in late August, and then lectures kick off from September onwards. So it's one intake a year, and we do rolling admissions, and we're open at the moment for the 2022 intake. So you do have time to apply, but I would always recommend early application, especially if you want to consider scholarship opportunities. And also, as it's already been touched on, but things like time management, you do want to ensure that you have a place that you're all your ducks are in a row and everything before summer kicks off. So you do get a summer before you join an MBA program, and you become very, very busy. So you do apply online through our website. We don't take paper applications. There's a little arrow there. It's an app to the right-hand side of the screen on the page. There's an application. You click on that, you create a UCD profile, and it takes you through there. It's very straightforward. It's basically a very standard online application form. In terms of what we look for applicants, so the most important thing would be having work experience. So we are what's called a post-experience master's. You are required to have professional work experience before you join an MBA program. So for all our MBA programs, we look for a minimum of 3 years professional experience. But I would say across the 3 programs, the average in the class is a lot higher, and I will touch on that in a little bit. So as well as the professional experience, you also need to have a university degree. So if you don't have a degree, or if you studied a number of years ago and may have a level 7 or a level 6 qualification, that's no problem. You just need to get in touch with us before you apply, and we'll take you through the steps that you need to do. But every year we always have people who come with, a non-traditional route, and that's no problem at all for us in our program. We also do look for what's called either an executive assessment or a Gmat. The next slide will talk about these in a little bit more detail, but in a nutshell, these are standardized tests that assess your verbal skills, your mathematical skills, and your reasoning skills. So, all the things that you need on an MBA program, this assesses it. And because we don't require anyone to come from any particular background, you don't need to have, done quantitative study in your former undergraduate career. That's why we do ask for that. So I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail soon. And then it's just the completed application form. So you'll be asked basic details. You'll be asked a few short questions on why you're applying for an MBA and what you're hoping to utilize an MBA for. So my definite advice to people is always do your homework before applying. What do you think you're going to get out of the MBA program? Do you want to accelerate your career? Is it that you want to pivot into a new direction? Do you want to become more globally minded, make a new network? Everything like that. I think really put that in your application, because that is what the admissions committee is looking to find out from you. And then once all that is received, any eligible candidates are deemed suitable, are invited to interview. The interview is with one of our MBA admissions committee members. So it'd be myself, Mark, Adele are all on that. And it would be a one-to-one Zoom where it's really more of a conversation rather than an interview, but it's a chance for you to ask any questions and for us to get to know you in a little bit more detail. So then just going on to the Gmat or the EA. So what are they and why do I need one? And firstly, just to say, you need either or. You don't need both. And, you definitely don't need both. I definitely would not recommend that. But the EA and the Gmat, they are essentially standardized tests that measure your basic skills that you would need in a very challenging MBA market. So Ruth touched on earlier about things like financial modules. You absolutely learn that on the program, but this helps you assess even before you join the program. Will you feel comfortable with that? And it's also very important when you think about the amount of group work that's done on the MBA. You want to ensure that you're ready for the modules that you'll be undertaking, and you want to ensure that everyone else in the class is also ready for that. So all three the two of them are similar enough in that they cover 3 main areas. So they cover writing skills, mathematical reasoning, and integrated reasoning. The biggest difference between the two is the time. So an executive assessment takes 90 minutes. It's 3 sections of 30 minutes of questions. It's very straightforward. It takes about 20 to 30 hours of study and prep before you sit it, and you can sit it either in a test center or you can sit it as an online exam. The Gmat covers the same areas, but it covers them in much more detail, and there's essay questions. There's a lot of very complicated maths, I would say. It is a 3-hour exam. I actually think it's a 3-hour, 10-minute exam. and it does take about between 60 and 100 hours to prepare for. My recommendation would be to anyone applying for our programs is to sit an executive assessment. We do accept it for all 3 of the MBAs, and it's much more suitable for fitting into someone who already has a very busy life and busy schedule. The Gmat is the gold standard, the original test. Previously it was the only exam we were able to accept because the EA is fairly new. It is also required for some other MSc programs, and I do know some employers look for a Gmat score. So for example, McKinsey. So if you do have a good Gmat score, it will always be of benefit for you. You will always be able to use it on CVs or talk about it in interviews, but it's not necessary for entry into business school, or certainly our business school at this time. So unless you have a real want to do it, I would definitely recommend you do the EA instead. And then the exams are scored slightly differently. So the EA is scored out of 200. For the full-time, you need to get 151 and above. And for the EMBA or modular, it's you need to do, I'll just see it there, it's 149 out of 200. And for the Gmat, for the full-time MBA, it's a score of 600 and over. And for the EMBA, it's 520 and over. So there's lots of information available on these exams through our website. And also we link you through to the official, it is a third party who runs them. There's plenty of information online about them. So what you can choose to do is apply to the program, get what would be called a conditional offer, and then go and choose either the Gmat or the EA to sit. And we would ask you to have these scores into us really no later than June or July of 2022. So you do have plenty of time. If this is the first you're hearing about these exams, you do have plenty of time for them, so don't worry. So a lot has been talked about the different programs people have done and the different types of MBA. So just to go into that in a little bit more detail, we do, as I said, have 3 MBA options that you can do with us here at the Smurfit School. So the first would be our full-time MBA. This is kind of our flagship MBA program. As was mentioned earlier, this is a fully immersive learning experience. I definitely wouldn't recommend working alongside it unless you are doing, as was previously mentioned, just a few hours a week. It is very much a full-time job, I would say this. So you would really want to concentrate on it. It's a very diverse international cohort with a real international focus. The international study tours that were mentioned earlier, they are mandatory part of the full-time MBA, and we do get a lot of international students on our full-time MBA program. So it's a really great way to network with people from all over the world. It's definitely a real chance to change or redefine your career. So as I think was mentioned earlier, if you're really looking to pivot or move out completely of the industry that you were in, I would really recommend a full-time MBA program. I know it can seem scary, the idea of going back to full-time education, but the benefit of doing the full-time program as well is it is just 1 year in length. So you have that year to concentrate on your studies, concentrate on yourself, your job search, and the year absolutely flies by. So I do always recommend it for anyone who is considering a complete change. In terms of averages on the class, the average age is about 30 years old with about 8 years work experience. But that's an average that covers a range. So we would have people in their 50s on the program, and we would have people from their 20s to their 50s. So as I said, the minimum required is 3 years work experience, but you can see even with that program how much higher that is. Then the executive MBA program. So this is one that takes place part-time over 2 years, and it takes place on a Monday and a Thursday evening. So it's really designed for people who want to balance and study working alongside each other and sort of develop and accelerate their career. So for example, if you study, modules that were mentioned earlier, or like around anything like organizational behavior or something like that, what you learn in class on Monday with your colleagues and your, fellow students and your academic staff leading you apply to work the next day. There's absolutely no downtime in your learning, and it's a great way to really accelerate your career very, very quickly. We definitely recommend it for senior professionals, and I would say in the Greater Dublin area, just for the fact that you will be required to be on campus twice a week, and it would be difficult if you were traveling from further afield. That's just what we found in our experience. The average age on that would be about 35 years old with 13 years work experience. So you can see it's a slightly older cohort, but again, it is open to anyone with 3+ years experience. And that, as I said, is a part-time program over 2 years, and it is on a Monday and a Thursday evening. And then our final MBA program is new for this year. So the current cohort is the first cohort, and that is our modular MBA. And this was designed to offer ultimate flexibility to senior professionals nationwide and even abroad. If you're living abroad, but you can get to Ireland once a month, then you can absolutely undertake this program. So this is designed for ultimate flexibility, and it was really designed in response to people who lived outside of Dublin, who would have had, maybe families and they felt they couldn't balance either of the other programs, and people who wanted a bit more of an independent style learning. So with that program, you were on campus once a month, and you were on campus for a full day on a Friday and a full day on a Saturday, and once a month you complete a module. So it's quite an intensive style of learning. Along with being on campus, you would be expected to do some online learning, both with your groups, self-study, and also working with the academics. So definitely you would need to be a bit of an independent learner. You would need to be comfortable with that. And it's also definitely recommended for anyone who feels that realistically being regularly on our Dublin campus wouldn't be possible for them. So the average age on that program is 37 years old with about 15 years work experience. And again, that's a 2-year program, part-time, and it takes place on the weekends once a month. The dates for that, if you refer to our website, they're up there. And as I mentioned earlier, because I know somebody asked it, for the executive one, it is a Monday and a Thursday evening, and that will be the same for 2022. So scholarships, which is always a very popular topic to talk about. So we do offer a number of merit-based and need-based scholarships for our MBA programs. They cover all 3 MBA programs. They do range from partial support to full tuition fee covers. And we also have a number of scholarships specifically for women, such as Women on the MBA and the 30% Club Scholarship, which is an NGO that we work with, which is trying to encourage more female participation at C-suite level. Most scholarships have no separate application form. So when I mentioned earlier that you apply through our website, within the actual application itself, there is a scholarship section. So what you need to do is go to our website, have a look at the scholarships available, maybe see one in particular that you think you would really like to apply for, and you include that scholarship name and a short supporting statement in the application itself. So most are done like that. It's very straightforward, and then you'll be assessed through that way. I should also say that all UCD alumni automatically get a 5% discount on their fees. You don't have to do anything extra to get that. Scholarships are competitive, I would say. We do have a range of scholarships, but they do cover all 3 programs. So they're not guaranteed by any means, but I would always recommend apply for one, absolutely, if it's something that you're considering. And earlier there was conversation about employer support. Always on our part-time programs, a number of people would have employer support, but if that was a route that you didn't necessarily want to go down with your future planning, then absolutely apply for a scholarship. It's a great way to help fund your studies. And the school is as generous as it can be, and we really want to attract the best students. So that's I would definitely recommend applying. And just to say as well, a scholarship that's just open at the moment and that we're here to talk about a little bit later is the Journal.ie scholarship. So we partner with the Journal to offer a 100% scholarship for one student joining either of the 3 MBA programs. So we're joined by our current scholarship winner in a few minutes. Again, that's very straightforward. When you are applying for the program, within the actual application itself, you just put in that is a scholarship you want to apply for and why you feel you would be a good fit for that scholarship. So I'm just wrapping up now. So I know there's a lot of information comes at these information mornings, and sometimes they can be a little bit overwhelming. So I always like to kind of recommend some sources of information that you can always go back to. The first would be the Smurfit School blog. Catherine has been sharing some links in the chat box for this earlier today, but that is a blog that's kept by current MBA students, and it's a great way to gain an insight into the program itself, how the modules are done, and their own experiences. So I absolutely always say that's one of the best resources that you can go into. The second would be our news feed. This would be our news page, because outside of the MBA itself, obviously Smurfit is very involved across all our master's programs. We're hugely involved in business and commercial activities. We're often in the news, and I always recommend keeping an eye on that for kind of news and events that are coming up. Obviously, the last year and a half, all of our events have been online due to COVID, and we did record all of those. So our webinars is the sort of library of recorded events that we have done previously. So some of the events are like this. We also have specialized masters, taste lectures, everything like that. So, if you ever want to have a peruse of that, it's a really good resource. And then hopefully over the next year, we'll have a mix of in-person and virtual events, fingers crossed. And anything coming up along that line will be on our events page there. We also have a number of MBA clubs and societies. So for example, Mba, which stands for Gender Equality on the MBA, the consulting club, fintech, and a huge amount more. So if that is something that would appeal to you, the kind of social aspect of running a club with Smurfit, that's absolutely something that you can get involved in. If you have any questions around that, you can contact myself or Catherine, but it's a great way to sort of grow your network and grow your interest with the support of the school. And then we also have a YouTube channel, which is just great for information and videos from across all our different programs that we run here and our academics. And then finally, if you do have any specific questions, if you email mba@ucd.ie, either myself or one of my colleagues will be able to answer your question there and help you out with anything that you might need. So that's it from me. I'm going to play a video now, or I'm going to ask Paul to play a video, please, from Cathal O'Riordan, who is a current Year 2 EMBA student who did the executive assessment. And he's recorded a short video where he kind of has some tips and tricks on how you can prepare for it.
Hi, so the guys in UCD asked me if I could summarize in sort of 5 minutes or so any tips and tricks I can pass on about how to get past the executive assessment as part of your entry requirements to do an executive MBA. So I did this during the summer just past. I decided to do the executive MBA around May and kind of quickly decided to do the executive assessment as opposed to the Gmat. And how I reached that decision was, I suppose, I spoke to people in faculty in UCD, and I also was lucky enough to speak to some current students of the executive MBA who were already there ahead of me. And I got their advice, and I suppose consistent advice from them was that time commitment wise, that's the big advantage of doing the executive assessment over the Gmat. The scope of the exam isn't quite as big. I think it is more expensive, so that's a factor, and you have to bear that in mind. In my case, work were sponsoring it, so that was not such a factor for me. But all I can say is I decided to do it in May. I took the exam in June. I passed fine, so I was able to fit it in alongside work reasonably easily. You know, a few days a week, doing maybe 2 or 3 hours of prep. That was enough prep for me, and I was able to get a decent passing grade. So it worked from that perspective for me. In terms of actual preparation for the exam then itself, I suppose it's only 5 minutes, so it can't be overly verbose with this, but the big point I'd emphasize on preparation is to just get practice questions and just do practice questions and do more practice questions. And that is the best way to prepare for this exam, because there's a sort of a knack to some of the different sections. And for me anyway, the best way for me to learn was to actually do the practice questions and pick up the knack of how to answer some of them then by getting things wrong and looking at what I got wrong. And that's how I learned. So there are 3 sections to the exam. There's integrated reasoning, there's verbal, and there's quantitative. And those 3 are all part of the Gmat as well. So the Gmat's a broader scope exam, but you can use practice questions from the Gmat too and part of your preparation. I use the practice questions from the GMAC, and there's some free ones on there. You can also buy some. I didn't bother because I just rounded out my practice then with other free exams, those sections of the free Gmat exams, and that's how I prepared. By doing the preparation questions, you'll find out pretty quickly what you're strong at and what you're weak at. So for me, the quantitative sections, I'm kind of, maths is, you know, I'm reasonably strong at that. So for me, with the quantitative sections, I just found that I was able to answer those reasonably well. And I'm just looking at my notebook here from the exam, and all I'd written down was, don't get cocky and estimate things, work out the answers properly and be sure. And take a guess if you run out of time. And that's important. Do take a guess if you run out of time, because you got to answer all the questions. The quantitative section's at the end. So the way I think the exam works is that it's adaptive in that if you're answering the first section well, integrated reasoning, then the next section gets harder. And if you answer that poorly, then the next section gets easier, and the marks reflect the degree of difficulty. So I'm looking at my grades here, and I must have had an easier set of questions in quantitative reasoning because I did not do great in verbal. But I'll just share with you the few tips that I had written down in my notebook. So integrated reasoning and verbal elements of it are probably the bits that I found hardest. So there's 4 different parts of integrated reasoning. First one's tables. What I'd written down for myself was just read them very carefully, determine the information needed from the questions, and just to answer each statement. And use the sort. You're able to sort the tables. So just make absolutely sure you get that question right. Those ones are a bit quantitative, so those weren't so hard for me. The graphics one, again, read the question carefully. And make a big picture summary of in your head of what the graphic's telling you. Be very careful on units of measure. They throw in some trick questions with that by changing up units of measure sometimes, so be wary of that. And check all the possible answers before calculating your own responses, and to be sure, because you ultimately are doing it's multiple choice, all these questions, but you can kind of rule some out fairly early. Multi-source then, and 2-part. These are kind of verbal, and these ones I just worked out a way that I think I got from one of the websites, just a method for answering these questions. So first is just identify the question is step 1. It's verbal stuff and it's quite wordy, so that's not as easy as it sounds. Then find a support for an answer in the section, what could actually be supportive of any position you take to answer the question. Predict what you think the answer is, and only at that point then look at the multiple choice options and eliminate what is definitely wrong. And then after that, I just had a guess. Now, I didn't do amazing in the verbal section, but that was the approach I took, and that was what I got it from one of the websites, and it worked, because if nothing else, it kept me calm, and I had my process in the exam to run through. For verbal, there's a few sections. Again, there's one around sentence correction. This one, again, just do as many practice questions as you can. You'll find some good material online that'll explain the difference between due to and because of and things like that. And one takes a noun and the other takes a verb. So there's stuff like that is just a matter of, at least for me, I had to just learn that, because I would use due to and because of as an example interchangeably, and apparently you shouldn't. So yeah, again, as many practice questions there as possible. And like I said, then the quantitative stuff, again, I just found that not too bad, and it was just a matter of paying attention. So read the questions really carefully, do as many practice questions as you can, and you guys should be fine with the executive assessment. So best of luck with it. I hope it goes well for you. Bye.
Great. Well, hopefully you found that video from Cahill useful. He did very well in the EA. He's been very modest there. But I think it's a really good example of just that you just need to practice the questions, see what your strengths are, and just pay attention to the reading. It's not designed to trip you up. It's not designed as a test to keep you out. It's a test that's just designed to assess your ability and ensure that you will feel comfortable on the program. So, and as I said, I would recommend the EA over the Gmat. 2 things he mentioned there. I think now you can choose which section you start first. So if you prefer to start with the quantitative, with the maths questions, you can, and then it will bring you on to the other 2 sections. And it is the same price as the Gmat. So they're actually the same price now. So those are just 2 small little things just wanted to say. So that, I've covered off everything in terms of admissions and scholarships. Obviously, people have a lot of questions on this, so please do get in touch with me if you have any further questions, or if you think of any questions later, or if you're watching this as a recording. So I'd now like to, we're going to have a Q&A panel to finish up the session this morning. So I would like to introduce Stacey Jameson as well. Stacey is our Journal.ie winner for this year, and she is on the Modular Mba. So thank you for joining us, Stacey. And
Good morning.
we'll be here. Nice to see you. I will also be here with Adele and Mark and myself, and we'll be forming the panel to answer a few questions from the attendees today. So Adele, can I hand over to you?
Super. Welcome, Stacey. Thank you so much for joining us. We've had a great morning this morning. There's already questions coming in. But to start, Stacey, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your current role, and maybe why you considered the MBA at Smurfit School?
Sure. So good morning, everyone. Very nice to be here. So my name's Stacey. And I come from a science background, and I have a career of 2 halves really. So the first half of my career spanned academic research, and more recently I've moved into the pharmaceutical industry. So I completed a PhD and a postdoc, mainly focusing on the molecular pathogenesis of women's cancers, specifically the ovary and the breast. And then after my postdoc, I decided to make a career change and pivot into the pharmaceutical industry. So since moving into pharma, I've held several roles, mainly in R&D and medical affairs across sort of global international pharmaceutical companies. And in my current role, I work as the Senior Medical Advisor for Vaccines at MSD here in Ireland. So my reasons for pursuing an MBA is because I guess in the future, I see myself kind of evolving within the pharmaceutical industry and moving into more business development and strategic alliance management type roles. And I think the qualifications that you get in an MBA are really really nicely aligned with the skills and requirements that those types of job roles require. The reason I chose Smurfit is obviously the location is really convenient to me, living and working in Dublin. I wanted to do a part-time MBA because it aligns with my career goals and continuing to work full-time at this point in my career. And I'm someone who's pursued an international career purposefully. And so I think UCD and Smurfit's global reach and global outlook in terms of students' qualifications, its reputation around the world, that was something that was important for me for the degree to be kind of translational across countries. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Great, thank you, Stacey. You're with us on the Modular MBA program, Stacey, which is obviously Friday and Saturday once a month. A question that we've had from the audience actually in a couple of different formats is about the workload, and a kind of an add-on to that, if you don't mind, is how the assessment strategy works as part of the Modular MBA, whether there's formal exams or how exactly is the Modular MBA assessed?
Yes, so in terms of workload, it is a substantial workload. I think there's no kind of way of sugarcoating that. I think whichever format you decide to take on, it will obviously be a big workload. So yeah, you do. I think it's important to think, carefully about how you're going to fit that into your current lifestyle. And you definitely do need to make changes. I think everyone in the current modular MBA cohort are kind of really incredibly talented and skilled professionals, and they all have busy work and home lives, but we're all managing. So it's obviously doable. I think you just need to go into it realistically, knowing that you'll have to make adjustments, whether that be, maybe, working a bit later into the evening sometimes, or getting up early in the morning and doing a couple of hours then. I think everyone manages it differently and works around their own personal circumstances to make it work. The assessment, so I'm just in the first trimester, so I'm sort of in the thick of things at the moment, but the assessments are vary depending on the module, and they can be a combination of exams and sort of written assessments, written assignments, and we do those again either as individuals, in pairs, or in our study groups. So I would say it's less on the exam side for the modular MBA. In the first trimester, we've had one exam so far, and that was for financial accounting, and all the other modules and assessments have been written assignments. So again, I think it's about really planning your time. And I heard some of the alumni speaking about the time management skills that they employed. I think it's really important to kind of work some of those into your life to kind of get the most out of every minute, really.
Great, thanks, Stacey. Jessica, you spoke to us very briefly about the journal.ie scholarship, and we have an audience member who was wondering, do you just apply for one scholarship, and if you're not successful with that, what happens, or how does it actually work?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So how it works is you apply for the scholarship that you are most interested in. You just note that in your application and have a short supporting statement for that scholarship, but you'll be considered for any and other scholarships. So for example, you might not necessarily be successful in getting the scholarship you initially applied for, but you will be offered something else. So you don't apply for multiple scholarships, you just apply for one.
Great, thank you so much. I have a question here from an audience member, and I think I understand what they're trying to ask. Is it necessary, or should you think through your areas of expertise or your skill sets that you're trying to improve before you start the MBA? Or is it possible, I suppose, to maybe start and then start to hone in on exactly what you're trying to get from it? Stacey, did you consider a question like that before you joined us, in terms of, you know, being very specific about what you wanted to improve on, or did it just come over the course now of the MBA as you're studying?
Yeah, so I actually really enjoyed the application process. I got a lot out of it because I think the way the questions are worded, they really kind of encourage you to have a look at where you've been in your career till now, what are the steps that you've taken that have got you to where you are, and then where you want to go in the future. So I think the application process is a good kind of way of making you think about all of those things as you're applying and before you start. I have gone in with what I believe is a quite clear idea of why I'm doing an MBA, what I want to get out of it, and where I want to go in the future. But I think that's my personal circumstances, and for others it might be different. For others, I think it could be a case of just wanting to generally upskill themselves in business acumen and business language, or a sense of maybe wanting to make a change in the future and not quite sure what that looks like yet, but sort of pursuing an MBA and hoping to get some inspiration and guidance as they go through the program. So I think every single person is individual, and to be fair, I think the people that you meet in the class come from such a wide, varied background of sort of their own qualifications and the industries that they work in, that I think you really get exposed to ideas and concepts and careers that maybe you hadn't even considered going in. And then I know that's certainly the case for me. So I think definitely don't put yourself under pressure to feel you need to have something mapped out before you start.
Super, thanks, Stacey. Mark, may I put a question to you, please? Just someone is inquiring, how does the recruiting process work while you're on the full-time MBA?
Yeah, so obviously it will vary a little bit from company to company. I think the first thing to say is that the experience won't be and shouldn't be the same as maybe your first degree, or even your first master's experience when you're on the MBA program, because you're experienced professionals, you're accessing a very different market, and the hiring will happen in a different way. So I mean, you'll be in a class where there's a huge diversity of backgrounds, but also in terms of career aspirations, right? So even where people are interested in maybe working for the same company as someone else, they might be interested in a completely different job and potentially at a different level, So I guess what that means is there is a lot of bias towards kind of one-to-one networking. And obviously we would help you with that. We would give you some opportunities, we would give you some of the skills, and we would make some of the introductions, but a lot of that has to be your own proactive efforts. There are a few companies that come kind of on campus, or virtually or physically, to present to students, but that is probably only really where there's kind of big clusters of interest, so and opportunity. So more likely kind of bigger tech or bigger consulting firms where they're looking for kind of big numbers and a big range of people at a particular time. But the majority of our students would find their opportunity through networking, and often that is obviously through alumni, and that will make a difference in terms of going through the referral processes that are quite common here in Ireland, but also just in terms of getting the right information from those people to help you choose the right job to apply to in the first place, and to be, say the right things at interview. So there's a lot of ways that networking will benefit you. And even for the companies that come on campus, to be honest, you also need to be kind of separately networking with people there anyway to really get in. So yes, I mean, any business school that's worth its salt will put a heavy emphasis on that part of the program.
Super, thanks, Mark. There's a question in which I'll actually answer myself, which is about the overlap with students between the executive and the modular MBA programs. whether you work collaboratively on group projects, or is there an opportunity to interact and network with students across the two programs? So the answer to that is yes. A number of the modules mean that you'll work collaboratively with across both the full-time and the executive programs. One of the other questions I've had, Jessica, maybe you could talk to, is about the average age of the modular being at 37. Is it fair to assume that the average person on the course will have developed some of the skills taught already? And would someone be at a disadvantage if they were younger, with maybe minimum exposure at the moment, probably doing, a business development type role? And what type of MBA would you recommend for them in the first instance?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it really depends on the individual, but I'm sure Stacey will say this. It's quite the modular this year. They are quite, it's people with quite a lot of experience from every different industry, but people are quite experienced on it. So I wouldn't say, it's not necessarily that you would be at a disadvantage, but we do call these post-experience masters. You do have to go into an MBA program, no matter what one you join, with a minimum amount of experience. I don't think you necessarily have to have, say, minimum 15 years to be on the modular. But if you do have less than that, I would really consider looking at the full-time program. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think people find it a bit scary, the idea of stepping out of employment. But really, it's a lot easier to do that when you have a few years work experience and you are on a more junior level, and then you can go into a higher level. In terms of the question around, say, have people already studied this? I mean, absolutely. I speak to people all the time who are HR specialists. So you kind of think, okay, well, what would you get doing a module in HR? But it totally exposes you to that subject from a completely different point of view. So you might be what you consider experienced in something such as organizational behavior or data or accountancy, but you'll be studying it at MBA level with people who don't have that experience. So you'll see it from a completely different point of view. So I think there would be very few people who would join an MBA who would say, I have no experience in any of these subject matter areas. Everyone will have some, and some people will be very exposed to one area and maybe not exposed at all to others. But everyone learns together. And again, touching on that group work, collaborative learning, you're expected, if you are a subject matter expert, you're expected to help and bring that to the table as well while you're in the class. And if you don't have any expertise in that, that's not a problem. You're there to be taught. So I wouldn't be worried about that at all. But I would say, just circling back, if you are on the more junior side of experience, I do think the modular is better suited to people who maybe are a little bit further on in their career and who enjoy that type of self-paced study and doing an MBA. You're not precluded from applying at all, but maybe consider doing a full-time or an executive option if you think that would be a better fit for you.
Okay. So I'm very aware we're approaching 12 o'clock and we promised to actually wrap up and get you out of here on time on this beautiful Saturday morning. So I'd like at this stage just to say we are available at any stage to answer questions further over email, mba@ucd.ie. All of the information that we've referred to this morning is on our website, smurfitschool.ie. And as Jessica has already said, there's lots of recordings of previous webinars there and also a full list of our upcoming webinars. At this stage, I'd like to thank Stacey so much for joining us, and thank you to all my colleagues and to everybody in the background for helping to put this together for us this morning. So without further ado, I'll wrap up. Thank you so much for joining us. If your question hasn't been answered, please email us mba@ucd.ie. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.